Last week, 3 medical licensing boards said that they could revoke doctors' medical licenses for providing COVID vaccine misinformation. I'm worried about the chilling effect here. There are clearly many remaining unknowns, and science is all about probing unknowns. But in the present supercharged climate, and I'll point out that multiple members of this committee are certified by these boards, I want to ask FDA, what is FDA doing to ensure that those advising it are able to speak freely without fear of reprisal? Thank you for your attention.
Hello, my name is Dr. Joseph Freeman, no conflicts to declare. I'm an emergency physician educated at Cornell Medical School. My residency was Charity Hospital in New Orleans, and I've been working in this region since. Where I work, over 65% of the population are not vaccinated. I'm here today to ask for help for those working the front line to help us reduce vaccine hesitancy. For this, we need larger trials that demonstrate the vaccine reduced hospitalization without finding evidence of serious harm. I know many think the vaccine hesitants are dumb or just misinformed. That's not at all what I've seen. In fact, typically, independent of education level, the vaccine hesitant I've met in the ER are more familiar with vaccine studies and more aware of their own COVID risk than the vaccinated. Next slide, please. For example, many of my nurses have refused the vaccine, despite having seen COVID-19 cause more death and devastation than most people have. I asked them why refuse the vaccine. They tell me while they've seen the firsthand dangers of COVID in the elderly, the obese, diabetics, they think their risk is low. They're not wrong. Next slide, please. One nurse showed me this Oxford risk calculator. A 30-year-old female has about a 1 in 7,000 chance of catching COVID and being hospitalized over 90 days. She asked me, can I assure her that the studies found her risk of serious harm from the vaccine is lower than her risk of hospitalization? The truth is I can't. Our trials weren't big enough. They weren't big enough to identify the vaccines cause myocarditis, yet now we know they do. Next slide, please. A recent observational study suggests the risk of vaccine-induced myocarditis in young males is higher than their risk of hospitalization from COVID. Is this true? We don't know. It's based on observational data. To know it's not true, we need a large trial that proves the vaccines reduce hospitalization more than they cause myocarditis in this age group. Next slide, please. The former FDA commissioner said the original premise of the vaccine was to reduce death and hospitalizations. And that was the data that came out of the initial clinical trials. Except, as you all know very well, and unfortunately, so did my nurse, the initial clinical trials did not find a reduction in death or hospitalization, likely because they were inadequately powered. Yet the former commissioner is correct that the initial trials should have been powered to find a reduction in hospitalization. Next slide, please. We need your help on the front lines to stop vaccine hesitancy. Demand the booster trials are large enough to find a reduction in hospitalization. Without this data, we, the medical establishment, cannot confidently call out anti-COVID vaccine activists who publicly claim the vaccines harm more than they save, especially in the young and healthy. The fact that we do not have the clinical evidence to say these activists are wrong should terrify us all. Thank you. Next slide.
Hi, I'm Steve Kirsch. I'm Executive Director of the COVID-19 Early Treatment Fund. I have no conflicts. Advance to slide number 4 with the elephant. I'm going to focus my remarks today on the elephant in the room that nobody likes to talk about, that the vaccines kill more people than they save. Today we focus almost exclusively on COVID death saves and vaccine efficacy because we were led to believe that the vaccines are perfectly safe. But this is simply not true. For example, there were 4 times as many heart attacks in the treatment group in the Pfizer 6-month trial report. That wasn't bad luck. Theirs shows heart attacks happen 71 times more often following these vaccines compared to any other vaccine. In all, 20 people died who got the drug, 14 died who got the placebo. Few people noticed that. If the net all-cause mortality from the vaccines is negative, vaccines, boosters, and mandates are all nonsensical. This is the case today. Death rates. Let's slide number 7 advance to the number 7 in the lower part. This shows that the all-cause death light rate in 3 cases. Only the VAERS numbers are statistically significant, but the other numbers are troubling. Even if the vaccines had 100% protection, it still means we kill 2 people to save 1 life. 4 experts did analyses using completely different non-U.S. data sources, and all of them came up with approximately the same number of excess vaccine-related deaths, about 411 deaths per million doses. That translates into 150,000 people have died. Next slide would be slide number 11, the nursing home. Now, the real numbers confirm that we kill more than we save, and I would love everyone to look at the Israel Ministry of Health data on the 90-plus-year-olds, where we went from a 94.4% vaccinated group to 82.9% vaccinated in the last 4 months. In the most optimistic scenario, it means that 50% of the vaccinated people died and 0% of unvaccinated people died. Unless you can explain that to the American public, you cannot approve the boosters. Slide number 16, please, myocarditis. The paper just posted yesterday on medRxiv entitled mRNA COVID-19 Vaccination and Development of CMR Confirmed Myopericarditis shows that the myopericarditis risk was 1 in 1,000. And that's an overall age range from 18 to 65, mean age of 33. It is not inconsistent with what the VAERS shows. Next slide would be slide number 18, gaming of the trial. It's pretty clear that the Pfizer trial results were gamed. It's statistically impossible for protocol violations to be 5 times higher in the treatment group. Why hasn't this been investigated? Slide number 19. Maddie DeGray was 12 when she enrolled in the Pfizer phase 3 trial for kids. Now she's paralyzed for life. It wasn't reported in the Pfizer results. I told Janet Woodcock there was no investigation. Please tell us why this fraud was not investigated. And finally, slide number 20, please. Early treatments are a much better alternative to boosters. The proof is that in Israel, cases are at an all-time high. In India, Uttar Pradesh is now COVID-19 free as of today. Almost nobody there is vaccinated. Thank you.
Yes, it's not that we want to raise issues and concerns, but here's the issue. We want it to work. But when we look at the surveillance, coming out of the VAERS right now, CDC, it captures 1% to 10% by our study of the published literature of the adverse events. And that is very suboptimal because it doesn't give a proper capture of the burden. So we really do not know what the adverse events and the deaths are. So we want proper safety monitoring boards. We want proper ethics committees following up on these vaccines. We are calling for critical event committees, but we do not seem to know whether they exist. So we want the FDA to get on top of these vaccine developers and the CDC and put this in place for the safety of Americans. And it's a simple issue. You are giving us vaccines, and this is what we have been clamoring for. If you have an investigation of a vaccine with 1,000 samples, you put 500 in each arm, and you follow that for 1 year, versus you have another study of 100,000 people, and you follow that for 2 months. And the safety events that we are looking for, the safety signals happens at about 5 to 6 months. How could that larger sample detect them? And that's the issue. We are calling for longer term studies, larger sample size, but longer term. We need the medium and long term studies to best assess the safety and efficacy, particularly safety, particularly when you're talking about putting these vaccines in our children's arms. We currently do not have the safety data. We absolutely do not. And for anyone at the CDC, anyone at the NIH, and anyone at the FDA to claim so, that is being disingenuous to the public. Now, I wanted to end by saying this. I looked at a study this morning by Chen on testicular infection post-CoV, SARS-CoV-2 virus. That means that there is an issue, and we are extrapolating based on the Japanese data that looked at the lipid nanoparticles and the mRNA that were accumulating in the tissue in the rat model. Yes, it's a rat model, but we have to extrapolate to humans. That showed that the lipid nanoparticle, the constituency of the vaccine, is accumulating in the ovaries, in the testes, in the spleen, in the adrenals, etc. So when somebody like Nicki Minaj, I have to invoke this, makes that statement, that's not a joke. People want to make this a joke and parody it, etc. But this is a very, very serious consideration because we even have animal data that shows us that there's a drop in fertility in the animal model. So we need this properly investigated. The public needs this answer properly. And I want to end by saying this. Under no condition, none, zero, based on the evidence today, must children be indicated for these vaccines. There is no risk to children, no statistical zero in terms of spreading and in terms of getting serious illness or dying from this. Dr. Martin Makary at Johns Hopkins, they looked at all of the data. Hello?
Yeah, we're out of time, sir.
Okay, thank you.
You can wrap it up.
Yes, we looked at the children in America that have died, and we found that save one, these children had at least one severe illness. So the reality is COVID is not a life-ending, life-threatening situation for children. Right now, the CDC and the NIH have not prosecuted the case as to why these children should be vaccinated, period. I say do not do this, and I beg your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak today on behalf of the National Center for Health Research. I am Dr. Meg Seymour, a senior fellow at the center. We analyze scientific data to provide objective health information to patients, health professionals, and policymakers. We do not accept funding from drug or medical device companies, so I have no conflicts of interest. Today, you're asked to discuss whether the data presented support the safety and effectiveness of a booster dose of the COVID-19 vaccine, and if so, for whom. I will focus on the safety sample data discussed in the FDA's briefing document. The total safety sample is very small, only 329 patients. Even more important, the sample is not representative of the people who will want the booster. There are safety data on only 12 patients ages 65 and over, even though people over 65 are considered a priority group for a booster due to weaker immunity. 12 people over 65 is much too small to draw conclusions about safety and is obviously not large enough to have any confidence in the claim that adverse events from booster doses are less common in those 65 and over. In addition, there are 0 patients ages 16 and 17, and safety for this population is being extrapolated based on safety for those 18 and over. Data should be collected for any population that the boosters would be approved for, rather than extrapolating pediatric safety from adult safety data. Unfortunately, the size of the sample is not the only problem with the safety data. A median of 2.6 months is not enough time for assessing the safety of the booster. In addition, we agree with the FDA that it is unknown whether there will be an increased risk of myocarditis, pericarditis, or other adverse reactions after a booster dose. We all know that COVID can be deadly, but the efficacy of a booster compared to no booster is not well established, since the placebo control group is missing in addition to uncontrolled variables that could influence the diagnosis of COVID for those with boosters and those vaccinated without boosters. Assurance that the benefits outweigh the risks should be gathered before approving booster vaccines. Otherwise, potential risks may become obvious only after large numbers of the general population have received boosters, and the benefits of boosters may be much less than expected. FDA decisions should be based on proof of the safety and effectiveness of a medical product before the product is widely distributed. To approve a booster without adequate safety or efficacy data undermines the integrity of the FDA. It is unfortunate that the White House announced the need for and availability of boosters prior to FDA's assessment of the data. We know numerous people who have already received booster doses by merely asking their doctors or local pharmacies for a third dose. We all want to get the COVID-19 pandemic under control and protect as many people as possible, which is exactly why it is so important to carefully and scientifically assess the safety and effectiveness of COVID-19 booster vaccines. The data provided for this meeting do not allow us to draw confident conclusions, and a premature decision will make it impossible to do the research necessary to draw scientific conclusions. Thank you.
My name is Dr. Jessica Rose, and I'm a viral immunologist and computational biologist. I've taken it upon myself to become a VAERS analyst to organize the data into comprehensive figures to convey information to the public in both published work and video mediums. Safety and efficacy are the cornerstones of the development and administration of biological products meant for human use. Risk is a measure of the probability of an adverse event occurring and the severity of the resultant harm to health of individuals in a defined population. Safety is a judgment of the acceptability of this risk in a specified situation. Efficacy is the probability of benefit to individuals in a defined population from a medical technology. Refer to slide 1. This is a bar plot that shows the past 10 years of VAERS data plotted against the total number of adverse event reports for all vaccines for the years 2011 through 2020, and for COVID-associated products only for 2021. The left bar plot represents all adverse event reports, and the right bar plot represents all death adverse event reports. There's an over 1,000% increase in the total number of adverse events for 2021, and we are not done with 2021. This is highly anomalous on both fronts. These increased reporting rates are not due to increased rates in injections and not due to simulated reporting. This has been shown using a comparative analysis of influenza data. The onus is on the public health officials, the FDA, the CDC, and policymakers to answer to these anomalies and acknowledge the clear risk signals emerging from VAERS data, and to confront the issue of COVID injectable product use risks that, in my opinion, outweigh any potential benefit associated with these products, especially for children. Slide 2. This is a time series plot that shows the total cumulative number of cardiovascular, immunological, and neurological adverse events for 2021 associated with COVID products. When the cumulative absolute counts are normalized to the total number of fully injected individuals in the U.S., we can see that 1 in 660 individuals are succumbing to and reporting immunological adverse events associated with the COVID products. The underreporting factor is not considered here. Slide 3. This is a phylogenetic tree showing the emergence of the alpha and delta variants of the COVID-19 over time. The emergence of both of these variants and their subsequent clustering arose in very close temporal proximity to the rollout of the COVID products in Israel. Israeli data from the Ministry of Health and Our World in Data reveals that 98.1%
המענה הקולי של 0, 5, 4, 5, 4, 5, 5, 0, 8, 3.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Sorry about that. Israel is one of the most injected countries, and it appears from this data that this represents a clear failure of these products to provide protective immunity against emergent variants and to prevent transmission, regardless of how many additional shots administered. And this begs the question as to whether these injection rollouts are driving the emergence of the new variants. There's clear and present danger of the emergence of variants of concern if we continue with these alleged booster shots. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Monto. Please see our written comments. Next slide B for our disclosures, and next slide C. With this Lancet paper by FDA vaccine officials, we find ourselves agreeing with them, but for different reasons. We have an unclear need with unclear motivation, significant safety concerns, poor evidence of sustained booster efficacy, and wrong priorities. So while FDA and Pfizer can't agree about waning efficacy, let's go to next slide D. We saw recently CDC's apparent withholding of key data from ACIP prior to recommending the Pfizer vaccine, and revealing that the primary driver for approving Comirnaty was to overcome hesitancy through regulatory misdirection. We agree with others that this has become politicized. Next slide E. Pfizer's booster evidence today is weak. They are small studies in mostly younger subjects. They are short-term. There is no randomized control. There are no clinical outcome data, only serology. Inadequate safety given this is a gene therapy product. Where are the data from the 10,000 patient study? Next slide F. If FDA cannot assure us of the safety of 2 doses, how can they assure us of 3? We see strong signals for death, myocardial infarction and coagulopathy that need transparent investigation. Next slide G. We find 3 potential pools of vaccine-associated deaths. Note the second pool among vaccinees. Next slide H. Daily cases in Israel increase upon booster rollout compared with the same period last year. Please note the correct rollout is July the 1st at the 130 number. The Israel booster presented today has matching censoring bias seen in related studies, non-comparable populations, possible clustering bias, inadequate accounting for early vaccine effects, and a short follow-up in mainly older people. Next slide I. Others show unexplained Israeli deaths lockstepping with booster rollout. This looks like the second pool deaths we said before in vaccinees rejected by New England Journal of Medicine in February. Next slide J. Other safety concerns not voiced in the label are revealed in studies funded offline by NIH for menstrual disorders. Next slide, K. And offline by CDC in a disturbing revelation of an urgent need to monitor safety in pregnancy. Put this in the label. Next slide, L. Long-term safety. No cancer studies were performed. Moderna said its vaccine was a gene therapy product. Why is the FDA not requiring 5 to 15-year cancer and other studies per their gene therapy guidance? Next slide, M. We propose the term PCOVs to describe the wide spectrum of events being reported. Next slide, N. We are running out of options. Vaccine hesitancy won't be solved by bullying or coercion. Address safety, show convincing booster efficacy, revisit repurposed drugs. Next slide, O. We reverse the findings of flawed landmark studies that have misguided policy. Journals refuse to correct these defects, and Dr. Rubin's seat on this committee is a conflict. Next slide, P. This is what has to be done. Thank you very much.